Great. Cool. So yeah, I don't know how long this call is going to take. If it takes an hour, great. If it doesn't take an hour, we will enjoy the rest of that time personally off the call. Our topic today is athlete coach communication. I think it is probably the most key component to the athlete coach relationship. I think personally, I wanted to do this topic at this time of year because we're kind of approaching the end of summer and fall. We have a lot of new athletes coming into the program. So this will be not only an important topic for them, but it's also important for current athletes, I think, to continue to refine the way that we communicate, to think about the way that we communicate with our coach. Just really, really important. All the information that we give our coaches is, it's vital. It really is. Communication about upcoming goals, communication about injury, how we're feeling mentally and emotionally, all that stuff. I know for a lot of athletes who are like working towards current goals right now, they've got like their biggest race of the season coming up. This is a really great time to refine that communication. And then for newer athletes, this will be a great call to reference when you're thinking about how should I best use the training logs, how should I best talk with my coach, all of that. And I think sometimes athletes don't necessarily recognize the importance of this part of the process. So hopefully we can, peel back the curtain a little bit on that, streamline the process, build some awareness, understand what the best practices are. That way we can all get the most out of the training.
Yeah.
I'm going to throw it to Coach Drew to kind of start off the conversation. Because Drew, you're like moving into full-time coaching. You're taking on a ton of new athletes right now, really building out your roster. I'm kind of curious, like what the first things you're thinking about when you're communicating with a new athlete, an athlete who's about to join the program. What are you thinking about, in terms of questions on the questionnaire, or how are you determining specific aspects? How do you start that relationship off on the right foot?
Yeah, so I feel like there is some, stigma that exists when it comes to virtual coaching. People think that because coaches are virtual, that they're not going to get an opportunity to communicate with them effectively or efficiently or often. And so oftentimes, especially with new athletes, I'm really trying to, ease those fears and let them know, there are a ton of ways for you to get a hold of your coach. I know all of us do email, obviously, but there's something kind of unique I feel about Microcosm is the unlimited email kind of thing. You're able to write us 1,000,000 times if you needed to, and we're always there to help you. Also letting them know, the log that you guys have is not just a super useful tool for keeping tabs on your running and what's going on, but the communication there, it gives us an opportunity to communicate really on a really regular basis, like every day that you're supposed to do it. I like to give my athletes my cell phone number. They text me whenever they have, needs that require a quicker turnaround. And then I've had athletes who enjoy doing Zoom calls, really, if we're prepping for a race or wanting to go over a specific workout that's kind of making them nervous. I really feel like the virtual option and communication kind of go obviously hand in hand, but making sure that there are always really clear, easy ways of getting a hold of your coach when you need them. Another thing I really like to throw out to newer athletes and remind veteran athletes as well is that you've got like a ton of unconditional support when it comes to coaching through Microcosm, that a lot of people that join Microcosm, they're doing it for the accountability, right? They're doing it for the guidance and whatnot, but really people end up staying on longer because of that support that you're given, the unconditional support that you're giving, and letting new athletes especially know that that's what they're going to get from me, from your other coaches, really, really helps, set the boundaries and set really your relationship off right, letting them know that you're like the coach, like I'm here for you. I really like for athletes that join to know that we as coaches, we're not just like, do the workout, shut up, don't tell me about anything else. Like, you are just here to run and I'm just here to coach you running. When really we understand that everyone is human. Coaches are human, athletes are human. Everyone's got a life outside of their running world. And the idea is that we're here to kind of guide you through, not life, like other than Sarah's the professional healthcare mental health care pro, but for the rest of us, understanding that life happens, and then when we're writing schedules and writing these run plans, that you as a human have things going on, like your family, like your pets, which are like family to a lot of people, like your job, just whatever going on outside the world of running, and letting them know that we're going to work through this, we're going to work together, but it all comes back to that communication deal where we just have to have an open line of communication and be really comfortable communicating. Making athletes feel comfortable is huge. If you come into Microcosm and you're new and you really don't know your coach on a personal level, right? We've had like our Zoom call and you kind of get an idea who they are, but it's really important that you do feel comfortable. Everyone that works at Microcosm, at least I can say, I'm kind of one of the newer coaches, I guess, at Microcosm. Every single one of the coaches that I've gotten to work with through Microcosm is really genuine. Like, no one's faking being, like, everyone is like a really genuine, really awesome person. And that's kind of a cool thing. So as an athlete, feeling that you trust your coach, that you like your coach as a person and as a coach, I think is really easy things to do that help make the communication deal more fluid and easy and balanced.
Yeah, awesome. I think those are some really great insights, especially on like the coaching side of things. It's nice to hear, and I know like each coach is going to do this in their own way, but trying to kind of ease some of the maybe anxieties that exist around a virtual coaching experience. I know a lot of athletes who come into this from a team sports background. Maybe they did high school athletics, maybe even college sports. You're used to having a coach who, you're meeting with regularly, you're like out on the field with, maybe you're out on the track with them, whatever it is. And so a virtual coaching experience is definitely different. But I think sometimes a lot of athletes forget like a virtual coaching experience can be, full of a lot of open communication and continual communication on both a micro level, which I would consider the daily check-in, and then a macro level where we're communicating kind of on broader topics like goals and stuff like that. Personally as a coach, when I have a new athlete come in, there's some things that I like to communicate on. One is like, what is the athlete trying to get out of the program? I like to have talk a little bit about that with my new athletes. And I also like to kind of like throw a tougher question at them, which is like, what do you expect from me, the coach, from this experience? That way, we can kind of get right into things and see, what are those expectations? What is this athlete looking for? And then sometimes I can go back to those things later, remind an athlete, help them be more accountable. Okay, you're seeking a coach for these reasons, like you really did need accountability, or you're having trouble with your habits. Now I'm seeing that you're kind of doing things that are not in alignment with the goals that you've actually set for yourself. And you said you wanted this accountability, but you're thinking about, quitting because like that looks different than what you thought it would look like, and it gets kind of complicated. So having those questions can be really important right away. And I like those in kind of addition to, what you mentioned, Drew, about like easing tensions and trying to like set some like clear reminders about like that communication process. Like it's really, and we'll get into this more later in the call, but we really have like 3 kind of ways to communicate. I think they should all be used differently and very mindfully, but we have the training log, we have email, and we have text.
I think that idea of accountability is really important, because I think that, in my experience, being held accountable doesn't always feel good and isn't always fun. But I know that nothing makes me feel more seen and respected as an athlete when my coach holds me accountable to my potential and to the goals and standards I've set for myself. And because I set a high standard, being held accountable to that can be a challenge, and having to reconcile the gap between who I say I am and what I'm actually doing can be challenging. But I always feel really good when someone believes in me enough to point out that there is a gap. So like, I think that, that is something that, like, if your coach is maybe showing you a way in which you might be like falling short of your potential, it's not because they're trying to be mean. They wouldn't point it out to you if they didn't feel that you were capable of reaching your potential. And they wouldn't point it out to you if they didn't feel you were capable of taking responsibility and being held accountable. So like, you should feel good when you get that kind of feedback. It doesn't always feel like amazing in the moment when someone's like, hey, you said you wanted to run 100 miles, but like, you're not getting your long runs in, like, what's up with that? Like, that's someone who believes that you are capable of that goal. Right. So I think that that's just something I like to share, because I think that the word accountability gets thrown around a lot. But it doesn't always feel good right away, but it does feel good in the long term when someone believes in you enough to honestly give you feedback in a safe and brave space.
And I think it plays both ways. As an athlete, you're a human, but the person in the log reading your check-in is also a human, not a robot, a person with feelings, deep, complex feelings, a person that has other things going on in their life that could be very complicated and challenging. We're all humans kind of working together. And so when you get feedback, communication that is challenging, it's important to, I think, give everybody the benefit of the doubt. The coach is the expert. And even if that feedback is challenging, it is coming from a place of love. It's coming from I have your best interests in mind. I am seeing things that you may not be able to see because I'm over here, you're over there. It's a difference in perspective. And having that open and honest, very vulnerable from both sides communication, I think is really important. But it's something, and kind of going back to like the idea of like, if you're a new athlete, it's something that is developed over many, many check-ins. I think, the great thing about doing daily check-ins is you have an opportunity to like build that rapport and that honest feedback cycle a little bit every day. I think there are a lot of ways that process gets muddied, unfortunately, and we can kind of talk about that later on. But just in broad strokes, like that's really the idea here. Like when we're communicating, connecting every day, we have an opportunity to build that communication. And then when you do get communication as an athlete that's challenging, or sometimes as a coach, you will get information that's challenging, that that's coming from a good place because you've built that foundation of communication over time.
Yeah, I always call my logs with my athletes a safe space and a brave space, because they can bring their full selves to it and they can expect that I'm going to bring my fullest self as well. And I think that's really important to set that precedent. Like this is, while we are here for unconditional support, part of creating a mechanism for feedback means that you're going to get feedback that maybe you don't always want to hear, you don't always like, but that's what it looks like to be held accountable and to get feedback. And that's why we do it in a very safe, healthy, boundaried space. Like that's why you're not going to get a text from your coach telling you to like get the long run done no matter what. Like we've set aside boundaries, and within boundaries, that's where we're able to be the most honest, authentic, and unconditionally supportive.
Yeah, I like that. All right, let me steer the conversation a little bit. Maybe hear from Sarah, Kristen, and Kylie. I'm just curious, like for you guys, how do you like work to set expectations for your athletes around that communication flow? And I'm kind of talking specifically about daily check-ins and the importance of daily check-ins and checking in after your workout, not several days after your workout. Who wants to kind of line? Sarah, I see you nodding your head, so I'm going to pass it to you.
Yeah, I mean, I try at first to just like gently say, like, I'd really like to hear from you more frequently, or I try to empower the athlete to see the log as a tool for them to gain self-awareness and insight. And like, right, we can see patterns when you're filling it in. We can see when it goes from green to red and how many days it's in red, like when you're filling it in. And so each of, those boxes is a tool. And so I really try to talk up the power of the log as something that's for them, like even before it's a communications tool for us. And so like that, that's typically like the lens that I use is like, here's why you should do it. It's helpful for me. I like to know what's going on. It's hard to follow when you're just telling me at the end of the week. And I talk about like, right, if you've had a bad couple days, you're like, oh, this whole week was crap. I had such a bad week. You can really just focus on that. And you forget that, hey, Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday were actually all right this week. But if you're filling in that log every day, and we can see that, you're able to have better perspective and not get such tunnel vision on the day that you're logging. So yeah, I typically think like phrase it more as a tool for them than a communication tool for us in that way.
Yeah, that's awesome. I love thinking about it as a tool. I mean, that's exactly what it is.
I think for me, this just brings up like my coaching, a sticking point for me is when I have an athlete, like they feel sick or they feel injured or life gets really hard and they're stressed and they stop checking in. Those are the moments when it is most important for you to check in, because if you're so stressed or injured or sick or hurt that you can't run, that is when your coach needs to adapt the training.
Okay, but
that's why we have an easily editable log.
Yes, but I also want to say the same goes when you're crushing your training too.
Yes, yeah. There's no like the reason it is daily with exception of the days your coach takes off is because like especially like if your body is giving you information that means that training needs to be adjusted, like that is the whole point of having a coach. We're not just here to high five you on the days that go according to plan. We're here to make sure the plan is responsive to what is actually going on in the real world. So like, please don't feel like, I mean, I know I'm like so preaching to the choir because the people who like show up on calls and who like listen to the podcast are not the people that typically struggle with this, but like putting it out into the universe, sending out vibes that, my God, the athletes who like, when things get hard, that is when you most need to check in, because that is when your coach needs to adapt, like even beyond like emotional support and having someone to like be there for you. Like if you're sick, if you're hurt, stuff isn't going well, we need to adapt that training, and your coach can only adapt when they know what's going on.
Absolutely. Let me pass it off to Kristen. I just want to hear about how she kind of sets those expectations with athletes.
Sorry, there's an ambulance driving by, so it's like a little bit loud. For me with my athletes, typically, if I don't hear from them in like 2, 3, 4 days, sometimes even a week, I'll like write in the log, like, hey, like, how are you doing? How is it going? Let me know if I need to change anything. How can I better support you to like inspire you to update me more? Like communication is critical with anyone, especially with a coach who, is like Zoe was talking about earlier, where it's like, we all have blind spots. And I think sometimes as a coach, I have a really unique insight into athletes' lives. And so, if they're feeling burnt out, if they're just feeling like they're in a funk, like letting me know what's going on is so critical to like helping their progression, because we can find a better balance. We can take an extra day off to like recover, rest more. but I think as far as communication with me personally goes, like if I'm concerned about an athlete, if I haven't heard from an athlete for a while, I'll text them and say, hey, what's going on? How are you doing? Do you want to set up a phone call, a Zoom call? Like, how can we get you back on track? Because at the end of the day, like, my concern is that, you know, they've either lost the link to their training log, or are feeling like they don't need to update their training log. And that's just not true. Like, I need to know what's going on. Otherwise, it's really hard for me to build out the next week of training. And so, you know, if I still haven't heard from anyone, like from an athlete, I won't put in training for the week until I hear from them. And sometimes, like, that's kind of like the last resort, where it's like, hey, haven't heard from you this week. I don't know what's going on in your life. I don't know what's going on with training or how last week went. Please update me so that I can get your training log back up and running. Yeah. And I hope it doesn't come across as like passive aggressive, but like sometimes it's just kind of what you have to do, is just like be a little bit more stern and like, hey, we need to communicate better. How can I help you do that?
Yeah, I mean, the truth is we can't coach without information. And so I think I do the exact same thing. If I have an athlete who is getting in the habit of not communicating, I don't care if they pay. I will not update their log, because the expectation is that you do the workout and you check in. The check-in is part of the workout. It is the last thing you do after the workout. It's not something you do 2 days after your workout. It's something you do after your workout. It's part of the process. Like Sarah mentioned, it's about building awareness. It's about using the tool. We work very hard as coaches to develop very precise tools so athletes can have success. This is the fundamental tool that we use. And so if you're not using it, it's not my fault. That's up to you, the athlete. You are the doer. You are the executioner of the plan. I create the plan. I give you the support and feedback. You do the work. And so the log is part of that work. And I do want to get into a little bit more about like specific communication in the log, because I think for some people, it can be challenging to know what to say. So I do want to get into that in a moment. But I am curious too of what Kylie's perspective is on this.
Well, I have two perspectives, because I do nutrition coaching and I do run coaching, and I treat them both pretty similarly. Like you guys are saying, I am pretty firm with athletes in the fact that, you know, I'm here to support you, like you guys have been repeating, but you have to put in the work, and I'm not going to do the work for you. And so you'll get out of the experience what you put into it. So thinking about that perspective too, that, you know, we are here to provide you all the tools, the knowledge, the expertise, and kind of that support that you are looking for in a coaching experience. But even that sometimes isn't enough to get people to, you know, kind of commit. And the other thing is if you're not communicating or committing, why is that? Do you have a perspective on what your why is and what are your goals? If your goal is to maybe like just drag yourself across the finish line, feel like crap at the end of a race, then maybe you can get away with like only doing a couple of days a week and not communicating. But if you actually want to get the best out of your experience, then taking full advantage of having those coaches and communicating with them, I think is really important.
Yeah, I have to say, if you're not using the log, you're paying a lot of money to not use the primary resource we create.
I mean, yeah.
It's an expensive life decision. I have questions for you.
Well, sometimes I wonder, you know, with our price point, if it's not high enough to weed out.
That's actually, you know, we have looked at
really ready to commit, because coaching is a considered addition to like what it's a considered expense, right? Like it should be, at least. When you're thinking about spending $150, $155, sorry, service fees on PayPal, But, when you're considering paying that amount of money, which I personally consider to be a lot, to be substantial,
It's
you
all
have to
about
talk about that,
It's all about
like,
perspective,
I'm
though.
wasting this.
It's about perspective, because I actually am on a more like higher end in the nutrition coaching world, and it doesn't matter. Like, people still do not follow through with the steps of execution. So it's really a perspective of where someone's coming from.
There's some perspective right there. and some
Humans gonna
context.
human.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly.
Well, we're happy where we're at. And our, obviously we love the people who do put the time in and are here to support.
Which, like,
those
again,
who
is
are not doing that.
90% of folks. I think that
Yeah.
this call is mostly because we can all, like, I'm a communications professional. I love communicating, and it's always really fun to finesse how I, as a coach, communicate and bring, athletes into that conversation so they can understand how we work, and we can all work together to best serve each other.
I love that. I mean, that's basically, what this is all about, right? Because it's a two-way street.
Yeah.
Like we mentioned in the beginning, it's two humans working together to get people to a common goal. When an athlete has a goal, that becomes like a goal for the coach too.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean,
basically.
especially like when it's an athlete you've been working with for a long time.
Yeah.
Like, I know both of us have been like up in the middle of the night, like tracking someone at their 100, or like we'll just finish our long run and we'll like check our phones and we'll get like a text from an athlete like, I just won this race, or like I just finished my first ultra. And like, I like TJ's seen me cry over athletes, like we're very invested in our team.
Oh yeah.
Like, you guys are more than a spreadsheet to us, right?
Yeah,
So
yeah.
like, I think that's just to share that context.
Gosh, I hope everybody understands that. Yeah. Okay. Let's move on. I want to talk a little bit about the training log specifically. So there are a lot of different ways to deliver plans. I don't know. There's training peaks. There's what is it? Final surge or whatever. I mean, there's so many different, and there's always other stuff coming into the marketplace. Why do we use the most low-tech option available? I think this is something that everybody like wants to know about. We have athletes who have come from other coaches, joined us, are used to training peaks, then are all of a sudden back in a Google spreadsheet. Zoe, like, hit us with a couple like points on this. Like, why are we using
so
Google
like
spreadsheets?
we did look into some of these alternative platforms, because like, again, to like, without getting too wonky and getting too much, like, here's how we run Microcosm. Like, we're constantly trying to read the most updated research and figure out like what's applicable and like worth following. We're really trying to see what new tools are coming into the market or what tools exist in the market, so we can always make sure that we're super serving our clientele. That's our number one goal always. And when we looked into things like Training Peaks and Final Surge, we didn't love how much noise they project at athletes, right? Like, something we talk about is trying to find the signal in the noise. There's a lot of like picking out what matters amidst a lot of things that like don't really matter. And so like with things like Training Peaks and Final Surge, there was so much data on like, I mean, it was kind of similar to like why we encourage athletes to turn off the coach feature on their watches, as there are maybe black box algorithms spitting out equations that like aren't super productive or applicable to individuals. Things like Training Peaks encourage, like, some athletes, like, it's totally fine for them to train by heart rate, but we have a lot of people who like, particularly like if they're not using it, I mean, I know I say this all the time, but like, do not use a wrist-based heart rate monitor. I would literally rather you just like roll a dice to figure out, like, it's literally as accurate. Just like pick a number, any number, that's as accurate as wrist-based heart rate. So like, unless you're using a chest strap, being too focused on heart rate data can actually be fairly detrimental. And things like Training Peaks and Final Surge, we found gave athletes more data than was helpful for them in progressing and actually understanding how training works and how their body feels. Cause like, I think we've all probably had the experience of knowing how a run felt in our body and it feels pretty good. Like, we feel good about it. And then you either put it on Strava or you look at the pace and suddenly the number might actually switch your perception of how it felt, because now you're getting data that's maybe actually less important than your RPE, or relative perceived exertion, which is our number one thing that we're paying attention to. How did it actually feel? And again, we don't do that because we're touchy-feely, even though we are. We do that because that is the number one way that like most evidence out in the world suggests is best for training. Like that's the best way to train, not by pace, not by heart rate, by relative perceived exertion. So really tuning into that. And so when we were dissatisfied with things like Training Peaks, because they bombarded athletes with all of these metrics that had nothing to do with how they felt, how things were going. And we actually found it could shift athlete perspectives, makes them train too hard, makes them pay attention to things that like we don't even pay attention to in our own training. Yeah. And I think that that's something that you really see in a lot of tools on the marketplace, because as a lot of people demand data just because they like to have numbers, they like to feel like they know more. But my perspective is I don't want to know things, like it is not useful to know things that you can't apply. Like that's just noise, and noise can actually distort and it can change behavior. So like, why would we want to introduce data into the ecosystem that can shift behavior in negative ways?
I mean, it's really just a lot of just marketing on behalf of those, those app companies.
People think like, oh, I might as well have something that, tells me if I'm detraining or what,
right, or like what my fitness score is today. It's like, that's just a bunch of baloney.
Like, you don't need to have a fitness score to know like, I feel pretty good. It's Friday. I feel fit. I'm fine.
So Zoe, I think you did a great job of explaining, why we've chosen to use Google Spreadsheets. It's just a very straightforward environment. It gets right to the point. We want to keep that environment as unmuddied as possible. And so, just segueing into like maybe some of the best practices for the training log. And this is great for new athletes and for old athletes, because I think we can all, and this is something that I've done as an athlete who, has a coach who uses Google I use Google Spreadsheets with my coach, and I'm always looking to, be a better communicator, unmuddy the waters more so my coach can get what matters and give me feedback on that. And then we can move on towards the next workout, which is kind of what the whole point of this is. So, I guess let's go around the horn a little bit. I want to hear like one thing from each coach about like what they think of best practices for the training log. I'll start. I'll think my most important thing for me is keeping things unmuddied. We want to be concise. We want to get to the point. Sarah, what is yours?
We only know what you tell us. So make sure that you are filling us in on anything that is either a potential stressor or is indicative that you're experiencing stress.
Nice. Kristen.
That was so good, Sarah. That's exactly what I was going to say. I think for me, I like the long race recaps. Wow, that's hard to say. Race recaps. I think that that's super interesting, and I get a lot of like really great information from that. If we're just talking about like an 8-mile run on a Tuesday, I don't need to know like how every step felt. So I think just kind of being more concise in the logs, but what I really look for is like how you felt that day, what's going on in your life, how much stress are you experiencing at once, and where's it coming from?
Totally. Hey, how about Coach Drew?
Yeah, and Coach Sarah made mention of this before, but that 4-point check-in where you're talking about your fatigue and your physical state, your sleep is important, your mental, emotional state, to me, are really important to fill out every day to as accurate as you can anyway, because we're able to pick up on patterns as time progresses, patterns that have to do with what we've written in the plan and how maybe like a hill workout or a speed workout impacts your body and your mind moving forward, but also maybe work stressors that take place and how that has an impact on your body. So not just going through and be like 3, 3, 3, 3 and like done, on to the next thing, but really putting a little bit of effort into it. Like it literally takes 10 seconds, but to be accurate is helpful.
I think so too. And just to kind of jump off that for a second with that 4-point check-in, understanding that 3 is your baseline. That's how you feel, your normal state. And when you get into that 2 or that 1, you're not feeling so normal. Maybe we need to look at that. And especially if we're seeing that consecutively. And if we're hitting those 4s and 5s like all the time, maybe we need to pour on some more training because, things are a little too good. We want to create a little bit more fatigue for adaptation.
We have additional bandwidth to balance with stress.
Yeah, exactly. Absolutely. And so if you're skipping over that or glossing over that, over time, it shouldn't take very long to mindfully fill that out. If your new athlete could, take a few weeks, and I really like with my new athletes is like the first 2 weeks are all about getting used to the communication flow and getting used to like using the training log and stuff like that. And then, hopefully after that, we're starting to feel more comfortable. But yes, Drew, I think you made some really great points there, using that 4-point check-in mindfully. What happens on one day doesn't necessarily matter, but if it happens on 3 days or it happens after this situation all the time, that's when it really matters. So we don't want to get stuck on how any one day necessarily felt, but we do want to make sure that we're aware of any patterns that develop. So I tell athletes, don't overemphasize if you had 1 night of bad sleep, but if you had 3 nights of bad sleep in a row, maybe then we really need to take a look at something. Kylie, what are your what's your like quick hitter for best practice for the training log?
Putting the races in. It kind of drives me nuts when like people don't put their races in, and we work with many different athletes, and you guys are working with more than I am, but like I don't have the type of memory where I can remember like every single race that someone's doing, like the exact dates. And so like making sure that you put them in and then we can effectively build your training plan. So I've had some issues with that in the past, and that's been tough.
I agree. Definitely have to put your races.
I can barely remember what day my own races are. And I will also say that like putting in your daily entry, I'm thinking about this 50K in November is not the same thing as I have signed up for this 50K, see it on November 9th where I put it in the plan. It's not our job. Yeah. Don't worry. It could be like a Tuesday.
I will say also that it's super important for me to have athletes put in, like work trips, big adventure runs. I think that having that in the log to like build around is really important, because I can't read minds. I don't know what's happening in someone else's life unless they tell me.
Yeah. And like further in advance is great. We also, again, like understand life happens sometimes, as a journalist, I'll have to be like, oh, I'm actually going to go cover the story next weekend. Like, can I get my log updated? That's fine. Normal family stuff happens. It's like when someone's like, oh, I forgot to tell you that I've had this Disneyland vacation planned for 2 years. Can you please update my entire training?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the more time your coaches have to make those adjustments, the better those adjustments are going to be. But particularly like with the big stuff, races, things like that, we're marking in the training log next to the corresponding date, the day you're traveling home, when that race is, what that race is. If you email me, I'll still tell you to write it in the log. If you write it in the log next to something and it's not next to the date, I'm still going to tell you to write it in the log, because we can make mistakes. We're humans. Like, you're in charge of your schedule ultimately. Again, like that's the onus has to be on you. It's part of owning the goal. But I think we really hit a lot of these important points on communication in the log. We're trying to keep things unmuddied. We're trying to be concise, get to the point. I think it's very hard. I consider sometimes coaching like a reading comprehension exam every single time I get into my athletes' logs. And with some athletes, it's so hard. With other athletes, it's much more concise, and I know what to comment on. If you're new to the training logs and you're thinking like, I don't know how to approach this, just writing in the log, like, my legs felt good, my lungs felt good. That's as good of a check-in for me as a 500-word novel. Just writing, there's nothing to report today, is just as informative as a 500-word novel that's a complete play-by-play of your training. I mean, if you're one of
In
those,
fact, more so.
I would
because,
agree. It's more
again,
concise.
signal in the noise. If the signal you're trying to send is I felt good, but that message is buried in a Moby Dick version of your day, then that's going to be actually more difficult for us to decipher. And so thinking about it always makes me think of the Mark Twain quote where I would have written it shorter if I had more time. Typically more concise modes of communication indicate more thought and analysis.
Yeah, we really want to stick to the pertinent information. We want to stick to information that relates directly to the training. Again, an unmuddied environment. The training log is for training. Yeah.
And it makes me think of Sarah did an amazing post on it this week for Microcosm, but I just want to dispel any stigma, particularly for women, around reporting around their menstrual cycle. None of that's TMI, dog. We need to know that. Or sometimes people will be like, TMI, I had GI issues. I'm like, that's not TMI. That's that is important information. That is very good. There's, we'll set a boundary. If you say something that makes us uncomfortable or that we don't feel is necessary, we'll set a boundary. We'll let you know. But anything that's affecting your physical or mental well-being, that is important information.
And with the caveat, there's only one licensed mental health care expert on our team.
Yes.
It's Sarah. The rest of us, we have some basic skills, very basic skills. We're not therapists. So when things are really hard, giving some context is great, but sometimes just enough is I'm really struggling mentally. If I can't really do a lot with all of the details other than give you support,
and
personally,
mental health
personally, sometimes I think it muddies the waters a little bit. So again, understand we're not PTs, we are not therapists, we're running coaches, and we want to stay in our lanes because that's how we can help you the most. Let's move forward though.
I actually wanted to go back that you were at when we were going around the horn. I would say my number one short piece of advice is ask for what you need. Huge life hack. Instead of coming in hot and saying being, I don't know, for me, I don't want to say what this looks like for other people. What it looks like for me is if I'm having a rough day, I'm struggling, I will straight up tell my coach, David, I need you to tell me I can do this. David, I need you to tell me that I am good enough. David, I need you to tell me that I'm good at my job. I know to ask for, and I'll do the same thing with TJ, TJ, I need you to tell me that I'm a good person, or I need you to tell me that I am capable of achieving my potential, instead of writing 500 words about oh, I don't feel like I'm good enough. Instead of going a roundabout way to solicit the answer I think I want, I will just come out and say here is what I need emotionally today. Here's the encouragement I need. Here's the advice I need. Awesome. I'm not going to try to paint you into a corner with it.
Yeah, I think that's so important. Again, unmuddy the waters.
Ask for
we're
what
here
you need.
To support. But if it's clouded in all of this stuff, it's, we're humans. Sometimes we can't, we're not able to process the information for you.
Or we may just not be able to identify the feeling that you, or the need you need service.
Right, exactly, totally. And, we want to be here to support as best we can. And that's why we have other forms of communication. We have email and we have text. So, I do want to get into this a little bit here just before we run out of time, because this has been a really productive call. All right. So we offer unlimited email access and daily check-ins. Holy crap. That's so much communication. What is the best practice for email? Why should we email a coach? We've just discussed training should be in the training log, right? To me, that's anything that involves the daily process of training, really micro level stuff. And where email access comes into play is when we're talking about the macros, things that don't need an immediate response, but need a thoughtful response from the coach. Not time sensitive. Maybe we're dealing with things that are happening on a larger scale. So for example, race planning, maybe some big picture stuff, life changes happening, an upcoming move, thinking about how that might affect the training, life stress. If we need to give context to a bigger life stress, let's not muddy the training log waters. Let's keep things concise so the coach can give you feedback that affects your training. And then we can always send an email to get into that stuff to give some greater context. Those are kind of my very this is what we use email for. I think that hopefully is universal for all the coaches. But what maybe isn't is that access to text and phone access. We all give out our phone numbers because we want to have that really direct line of communication for emergencies when we need really immediate responses. And I think this is such an important part of communication, even though sometimes I can get overwhelmed by too many texts and stuff. I do still think it's yes, thank you, because these things are important and we need to address them, right away. For example, I have so many athletes got COVID this week, and many of you didn't get COVID, but
no. I was just that's a great time to communicate with your coach.
Communicating that immediately, so important. Same thing with injury stuff. If we're thinking about should I run or not? Well, obviously you shouldn't run if you're hurt, but sending that text really helps to up that level of communication, get that immediate response going. Sarah, I feel like you had some thoughts on this. I saw a little thing here in our shared sheet. Do you want to chime in?
On text, I don't remember if I had thoughts on texting. But I will say Zoe and I have been working together for over 2 years, and we've probably texted 4 times, just to give some context of what that looks like. I think it doesn't have to be, it's not something I use a ton of, but she added a new option for one of my workouts a couple weeks ago, and it was if I wouldn't know that I'd get a response in the log, and I needed to know that day, and so I texted her, for example. And if I had read the log earlier in the week, I would have asked in the log and not needed to text her. But
there's also been I love a text from Sarah and or any athlete that's just podiumed at my 50K.
Yeah, me too.
Always appropriate to let us know how your race went.
Definitely.
Never appropriate texting or calling us during your event. I will always, if I respond, which I probably won't because I am typically running at the same time that you're racing, my advice will be the answer is within you. And that's true. I'm not saying that to shirk responsibility as a coach. I'm saying that because I authentically and truly believe with every fiber of my being that the best tool for you to develop is self-reliance in those moments. There's nothing I can tell you that will make the race less hard or that will change your capability. The race is still going to be hard, but you're incredibly capacious, and you know that. And all I can do is affirm that after the fact.
Yeah, gosh, I think this has been something that's been happening to me a lot lately is athletes coaching or athletes that I'm coaching, texting me during a long run or during a race. And that's a huge no. It's not going to help you in the long run if I tell you what to do during your race. Ultimately you're the person that has to develop the problem solving skills. Part of that is, going within, figuring that out on your own, just like you mentioned, Zoe. I would say that
we're your coach in the dugout. We're not your third base coach. We're not trying to tell you when to bring it home. That's on you. When you get there, it's so important again for your development as an athlete. And I believe this in myself. When you're in the struggle, the best muscle you can flex is that problem solving muscle.
Absolutely. And just learning to develop that autonomy, that independence. I think good coaching, even if athletes stick with us for 3, 4, 5 years, and ultimately I believe that's what every athlete needs to do to start to see their potential. Yeah. But we're still coaching everybody to a place of independence. That's why we write these newsletters on responding instead of reacting, and talk about the mental components, and help you guys work towards an infinite mindset and all of these important long-term things. These are tools that we can use to work towards independence.
I think that it's a Steve Magnus quote that good coaches coach people towards increased independence.
Yeah.
And I'll say my perception of Sarah and I's relationship, and it's been so cool to watch her become a coach, is that even though we've become closer as humans, she's become even more independent and autonomous and empowered as an athlete.
That's what it's all about. I mean, that is what we're here for.
I think if you're tempted to text your coach asking yourself, what will they say? Because we are pretty predictable. Like you're getting the same messages from us time and time and time again, right? Like you kind of know what we're going to say. So instead of texting, just try to see like, okay, if I sent this text, what would they say? And I bet you can answer it yourself 90% of the time.
Yeah. I think we used to joke that like we could create a microcosm like coach chat bot pretty easily.
Yeah.
And it's not because we're bad coaches, like that's consistency and clarity of messaging
very important.
is a strength.
Absolutely. What I can't remember, Zoe, what we were talking about this earlier this week, but if it pops back in my mind, I will bring it up before the end of the call. But kind of this last thing, and I want to get every coach involved on this, is social media Strava, particularly Strava. We don't even have to go into Instagram, but I notice a lot of differences between what athletes will write on social media about their runs and what they will actually write in their training log. And I'll start this off, but personally for me, this is why I rarely will comment or engage with athletes on Strava. Because again, I feel like the coaching should be done in the log. That's our environment for coaching. But sometimes I notice like, oh my gosh, like this athlete wrote like this really witty thing about their run on Strava. And then in the log, they like totally got down on themselves and like used the law of negative self-talk or whatever, or like didn't mention like that they were hurt during this run and said something, but then in the log, they're like, oh, I was hurt during this run, blah, blah, blah. So I'm curious, like and I just want to hear a little bit from each coach in the last like 3-4 minutes that we have about like how you deal with that in your like coaching practices. Coach Drew.
Yeah, I think for those in your example, I like to call athletes out in the log. Be like on Strava, I love giving kudos. Like I probably push that kudos button. I mean, too much. I need to get off now that I'm saying it out loud. But anyway, I'll call it out in the log, be like, hey, like I'm seeing some discrepancies. Can you tell me about it? And then usually there's an underlying issue where someone just doesn't want negative attention. They don't want people to think that they're weak or anything like that. And so there's obviously like multiple issues at hand, but as a coach, I call it out in the log. Hey, like, talk to me, what's going on? I'm getting mixed messages, and then trying to make sure that the truth is on the log, that the truth isn't on Strava, and they're trying to hide things from me in the log. You know, it can go both ways.
Absolutely. Yeah. Coach Kylie, what are your thoughts?
I personally don't have time to look through Strava and give everyone kudos. So I am sorry to any of my athletes on there, but Strava is not really my thing that I like go on and like give a bunch of people kudos and comments. And my Instagram is like, I call it business social media. So it's like, I have to use it for my business, and I don't necessarily like do a lot of personal like digging into athletes that I work with. So that's kind of how I approach it. And I, again, don't take it personally to any of my athletes, but yeah, so I probably wouldn't even notice quite as much. The only thing I notice is like athlete posts for races and stuff on Instagram. And then I try to like repost that, but that's my 2 cents.
Thank you. I think that's just as valuable a perspective. We are all very busy people. We don't necessarily have time to check everybody's Strava all the time. Kristen.
I think it depends. It depends. So I'm also not, for me personally, I don't like looking at Strava. So I'm not constantly scrolling and finding my athletes. But if I do know that an athlete has been struggling with motivation to get out the door, or has been like struggling with some like life stuff, I will comment and like give like an encouraging comment, like, oh my God, this is amazing, just so that they have that little like boost of confidence. Because if an athlete has been having a hard time getting out the door, like having someone tell them good job, maybe on multiple platforms, is like a little bit more reaffirming than me just saying it in the log. I don't know.
Yeah, totally. And I can see where it might be appropriate. And I think also, in kind of in the same vein, Kristen, you have an athlete who's struggling with motivation or struggling to use the training log to tell you what they've been doing, it's very easy to go check Strava to see, okay, are they actually running? Can I interpret this as being somewhat in alignment with our training plan? And although I still won't update the log until I've heard from the athlete, I'll at least know, like, okay, this athlete is putting in some work. How can we get them to start communicating?
Yeah.
Coach Sarah, what are your thoughts?
I typically don't really engage much unless like it's something like Kristen is saying, like if somebody's like overcoming an injury and I see that they, had a run, or they like have accomplished a big goal, or I knew they were stoked about this run and they did it, I'll give a kudos. And then really specifically if there's like a super celebratory Instagram post in the log, it was super negative, or there's a mismatch, I just won't engage with that post. So I just sort of I'm not going to like it when I would otherwise like it, but I don't really bring it up in the log or like call them out on it.
Yeah, interesting.
Yeah, I'll say like
So?
I engage on Instagram as an individual, not as a representative of like Microcosm or Trail Runner or like any other thing. Like it's just me, Zoe, out in the world, floating around, liking stuff, not getting on for like a week at a time, seeing some other stuff. Like there is no signal in that noise. It's all noise. There is no intent. There's no message. I don't really have time to have like a social, like a Zoe as coach Microcosm social media strategy. So I don't engage like with any strategic thing, but like I do follow, I don't follow all athletes on Strava. I follow athletes that have been with me for like years, basically.
Yeah.
And I also, there's not really any like specific intent there. It's just a weird mosaic soup of like bandwidth, who's been on stuff, was I on there when they joined? And I just don't, it is not for me, like it is not something I think, like I don't engage as a coach in either of those spaces.
Yeah, and I think it's important just in hearing that, and I see some head nods from the other coaches. The communication is done in the training log.
Yeah.
And that's on a micro level what we're doing. That's what we're set up to do. That's how everything works. That's the epicenter of it all. Again, like email is for those less immediate things, big picture stuff. Then we've got the texting for, really immediate responses, emergency, stuff like that. And social media and everything, it just makes things cloudier. And we want to unmuddy the environment so we can really give you guys like the feedback, the support that you need based on the feedback that you're giving us. So I think it's like really important to note, like we all might use Strava, or like, I'm not really on Instagram much, but like Strava to check up on athletes, or to like pop a kudos in like after a race or something like that. But the real feedback, the work, the communication, it's all happening, in this one-on-one training log, not a public facing environment like Strava. This is all about like working with the individual.
Yes. Yeah. We disengage in some spaces so that we can strategically and meaningfully engage with you in those specific, safe, brave, boundaried spaces.
Yeah, that's such a great way to put it. Well, thanks. I hope this was just helpful for everybody. I know it's always helpful for me to go kind of back through these things that we developed a long time ago and talk
think about our why.
Yeah, exactly.
We're always questioning why we do things, how we do them, how can we do them better, how can we do them in a way that best serves ourselves, our own mental health, longevity process, and because that also ultimately serves the athlete. Having coaches that are burnt out and miserable is not good for anyone.
No, and it's pretty easy to get burned out. So thank you guys. We really love and appreciate each of you, and great job, coaches. Thanks for contributing as well. I hope everybody has a great weekend. We'll announce the upcoming Zoom calls for the rest of August soon. I know we're traveling to Europe soon for CCC. So is Kylie. So is Kristen. So we've kind of got some different time zone stuff to work through. But when we communicate on that, we will let you guys know. But it'll probably be a lighter month, and then we'll have some fun in September. See you guys. Thank you.